yours truly, Brevin Thompson, is back to continue 80s May with one of my favorite films of all time, Raiders of the Lost Ark, which was directed by Steven Spielberg and produced by George Lucas. This film changed cinema in regards to action-adventure filmmaking. This film is easily considered one of the best of all time. And I couldn't agree more. When it comes to Raiders of the Lost Ark, it's about as perfect of an adventure film as you can get. And I'm just baffled about how movies like this don't get made anymore. And it's kind of like, this was like lightning in a bottle in 1981. But before I discuss my thoughts on the film, I have my good friend Ryan Cam collaborating with me on Raiders of the Lost Ark. I'm so happy to have him back. We're going to be talking about the original trilogy throughout this month, and we'll eventually do a video on Kingdom of the Crystal Skull when we're getting closer to the release of Indiana Jones 5 next year, so yeah, that's definitely going to be interesting. So before I discuss my thoughts on Raiders of the Lost Ark, it's your go, Ryan.
Hello everyone, my name is Ryan Cam. I want to thank Brevin for having me back on his channel, this time to talk about the Indiana Jones movies. I am so very excited for these because some of my favorite movies of all time are the Indiana Jones movies, specifically this one and number 3, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. However, this time around we're talking about Raiders of the Lost Ark, and the word perfect is not a word that I usually use with movies because, I don't think movies are perfect. Even some of the best of all time can be seen as flawed by some, but if you were to force a gun to my head and say, name one movie that you think is perfect, Raiders of the Lost Ark would definitely be one of them. I would even put this movie in contention for best film of all time. For 1981, this movie has aged tremendously well in a lot of respects. While he would be in the original Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back, I'd argue that without Indiana Jones, Harrison Ford would not have had a long-term career. Another phrase that I hate people using is, they don't make them like they used to. Well, I think that applies for Raiders of the Lost Ark. They truly don't make movies like this anymore. They try and capture the spirit, but it's just never the same. This movie is the exact, right combination of ingredients. The sun, the moon, the planets, and all the stars forming in perfect alignment to create Raiders of the Lost Ark. And while, in my subjective opinion, my favorite Indiana Jones movie is Last Crusade, I think that, objectively speaking, Raiders of the Lost Ark is the best Indiana Jones movie. It's top shelf indie. I'm fairly certain Brevin has broken down the plot of the movie, so I don't want to talk about that. I just want to gush about it for a little while, because there is so much to gush about. I'll start off with the action. This movie has some of the best action of any action movie ever. Indiana Jones is one of the greatest action heroes of all time. He consistently fights from underneath. Just when he thinks he has an advantage, something else, like some other roadblock, comes in his way. No better example of that than the temple scene. Just when he thinks he's out of one thing, the harpoons and the light, he's into the room where if he steps on a stone, poison darts shoot out. Just when he thinks he crosses the ravine, a humongous boulder rolls down the track to try and squash him like a bug. Later in the movie, just when he thinks he's maintained control of the truck, a lone Nazi soldier shoots him in the arm with a gun and actually beats him for a time, hits him in the arm where the bullet went in and throws him out the window. And then he has to get creative by crawling under the truck, using his whip to whip on the back of the trunk, climb his way back, and then finally get back into in the winning situation again. This movie feels like every decision takes effort, and there are a lot of movies that just don't feel that way anymore. I don't think I really need to tell you that Harrison Ford is perfect in this role, but Harrison Ford is perfect in this role. I'm sure many of you knew this already, but the role of Indiana Jones was originally supposed to go to Tom Selleck. However, he was doing the TV show Magnum P.I. And from what I've read about 1980s television contracts, you couldn't get out of them even if you wanted to. So Selleck was out and Ford was in. And like I said earlier, Ford has been in the acting game now for about 40 years, if memory serves. And I'm using a conservative estimate there. And I would say that Indiana Jones is a heavy reason as to why. He can get angry, but he also has a ton of one-liners. He gets legitimately frustrated, but he always figures a way out. He always says, I don't know, I'm just making this up as I go along. But he can back his words up. He always finds a way out of his situation. Just when you think he's at rock bottom, he always climbs his way out. Karen Allen is great as Marianne Ravenwood. She has more than a few scenes where she holds her own. Denholm Elliott is great in his limited scenes as Marcus Brody. While my favorite is Last Crusade, I kind of hate that they turned him into more of a comedic figure, because Raiders of the Lost Ark actually does a good job of showing that, hey, this dude is really smart. He curates this museum. Like, this guy's no dummy. Like, he's legit. Denholm Elliott's role is very brief, but when he is there, like, it's just great. This movie has some of the best exposition scenes in movie history. I will put the scene where the FBI agents tell Indy and Marcus Brody about Abner Ravenwood and the whole scene about the Ark of the Covenant against any exposition scene out there. It feels so natural, and you pretty much understand everything that you need to know about the Nazis and why they're going after the Ark, what the Ark is, where it's located, how to locate the map to get to the Ark. It's all handled in this one bottle scene in this, I want to say, lunch hall, but it's all done incredibly well. Jonathan Rhys-Davies is excellent as Sala. I love his opening of Cairo, City of the Living. I love this guy. And then there's Paul Freeman as Belloc. I will go down and say that the best Indiana Jones villain was Belloc, because the two were equals. Belloc is Indiana Jones. The only difference is that Indy fell on the right side of history and Belloc fell on the wrong side of history. In terms of archaeology, this movie portrays them as equals, and sometimes Belloc gets one on Indy. In the first scene of the movie, we see that after Indy gets the golden idol and runs out of the cave, guess who's there to collect? Belloc. Belloc even kind of rubs it in Indy's face when he says, Dr. Jones, as you can see once again, there is nothing that you can take which I cannot take from you. Like, it's condescension at its finest. I could talk about this movie for days and days, talking about how funny it is, the whole street scene where the soldier does his sword gimmick and Indy just pulls out his gun and shoots him. Like, that's just wonderful stuff. The Nazi dude in the black trench coat with the weird hanger and who gets the medallion burned onto his palm, and I love his opening line where he walks in, he's like, "Good evening, Fräulein." John Williams' amazing score. I just could go on and on and on, but I'm sure you all get my point. I'll end by saying this, reiterating what I said in the beginning of my portion of this video. I think that Raiders of the Lost Ark is about as close to perfection in film as we will probably ever see, and I will stand by that. But that is all for me. I want to thank Brevin for having me back on his channel, and I'm looking forward to talking about the rest of the Indiana Jones movies. But for right now, back to you, Brevin.
Raiders of the Lost Ark easily has one of the best openings in film history, opening up in South America in 1936. We see Indy and a few guys walking through this forest, and they're approaching a temple. You see, like, one guy about to betray him and about to shoot Indy, and Indy, like, disarms the guy with his whip. That is just so badass. And when he and Alfred Molina's character entered the temple, they come across spiders. Actually, that was Alfred Molina's first scene while they were shooting Raiders, with him having all those spiders on his back. And you can't help but feel sorry for the poor guy, because, I mean, honestly, I have arachnophobia, so I mean, if I was in Alfred Molina's shoes, I'd be scared shitless. I mean, because I mean, they had like all these spiders, and then they had a female spider put on them, and then they all went crazy apparently. And of course, they come across some traps. One that's activated by light. Once Indy triggers the mechanism, you see the spikes like coming out of the side of the walls, and there's the pads. If you step on the wrong side, there'd be poison darts, and that's when he starts to go for the golden idol and tries to like balance it with a bag of sand. And of course, it doesn't work, and the temple like begins to crumble. And Alfred Molina betrays him as well, but eventually gets his comeuppance. And Indy is later chased by that iconic boulder. And after that, he's instantly confronted by an army of Jovitos and Belloc, played by Paul Freeman, who is his nemesis. And he takes the golden idol away from him. Then immediately after that, Indy starts running for his life. He goes to Jock's plane. And then when he gets on the plane, we see a big snake on his lap, and then we find out that he's actually terrified of snakes. When it comes to Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones, I have always loved him as this character. Say what you will about him as Han Solo in Star Wars, I think that this is easily his best role. I mean, sure, I love him as Han Solo, and I loved him in The Fugitive, but this is easily, in my opinion, he gives it his all when it comes to him playing as Indiana Jones. And then we're later introduced to him as a teacher in Marshall College, and we see the girls are infatuated with him, and he's completely oblivious to it. And I really like that. This film has probably my favorite exposition scene, when we see Indy and Marcus talking to these two government agents who are informing Indy about Abner Ravenwood, as well as how the Nazis are trying to locate the Ark of the Covenant for Hitler, who is obsessed with the occult, and how the Nazis are excavating Tanis, which is the possible location of the Ark. And how I like how Indy is describing about the headpiece, the staff, the sun shining through the staff through the map room of the miniature of the city, which reveals the location of the Well of the Souls, where the Ark is. It all holds up after all these years. And how the dialogue is delivered in that scene. I like when Indy shows these two government agents a picture of the Ark and its power. One guy's like, "What is this supposed to be coming out of there?" Indy says, "Lightning, fire, power of God or something." Because that's one thing that we hear about throughout most of the film is the Ark's power and how people fear it. And there's a few characters who are unsure if it is safe to even go after this because of the power that this thing possesses. And I love the introduction of Marion with her having a drinking contest with this other guy, and she eventually meets Indy again after many years. And you can tell that there's some history between these two, how they once had a relationship, and they had a relationship and something happened between them. And I like how, after she, hits him in the face, that's when you're they definitely got some issues. Marion tells Indy that her father Abner is dead, but she's in possession of the headpiece of the Staff of Ra. Then we see Toad, who's played by Ronald Lacey, and we see him with a group of his cronies who are there after for the headpiece, and they attempt to torture Marion. And that's when Indy steps in and saves Marion. And after a shootout, that's when Indy and Marion decide to go to Egypt with the medallion, and that's when they meet up with Sala. And I really love John Rhys-Davies as Sala, and I even like what they do with him in The Last Crusade as well. And the basket game sequence still holds up after all these years, with Indy and Marion getting attacked by a group of guys. Marion eventually hides in one basket. Indy is looking for her, and easily the most famous moment in this entire sequence is with Indy shooting the swordsman. But the fun fact is, there was originally supposed to be a fight between Indy and that swordsman, but during filming, a lot of people were getting food poisoning, and Harrison Ford was really sick, and I think he had diarrhea or something like that. So to improvise, that's when he came up with the idea to just straight up shoot the swordsman. And Spielberg was like, okay, we'll do that. And that moment is just so badass. So after Indy believes that Marion is dead, he has a short conversation with Belloc, and then after that we get another exposition scene with this guy who's trying to like translate what's on the headpiece and saying that it's a warning not to disturb the Ark of the Covenant, and there's poisoned dates while this is happening, so you're wondering whether or not Indy is going to eat those dates. But then after Sala sees the dead monkey who ate like one of the dates, he catches the date at the last minute when Indy is about to eat it. And I was just like, whew, that was a close one. And the scene with Indy in the map room, the score done by John Williams in that one scene, it's easily some of the best that he has done for this series. And speaking of John Williams for his score overall for this film, it's one of the best that he has ever done. And you've heard me talk about John Williams a lot on my channel. I don't know what else I can say that hasn't already been said about this great man. He is the best composer that you would ever get for movies, especially blockbuster films. This is like top tier best film scorer. Sure. We all love his score for Star Wars, Superman, E.T., and Jaws, Jurassic Park, and Harry Potter. But Indiana Jones, it's definitely on like his top 5 best film scores in my opinion, especially when it comes to mostly his scores for the original trilogy. So we get like 2 different scenes with Marion and Belloc, and of course we get the moment with Indy going into the Well of Souls. And I've always liked it when he like tosses a torch down the Well of Souls, and he finds out that it's completely filled with snakes. That the look on his face, he is just petrified, and he goes, snakes. Why it had to be snakes? But Belloc and the Nazis eventually discover Indy, and they trap him and Marion inside the Well of Souls. But of course, Indy and Marion escape, and the scene with Indy fighting the big Nazi mechanic is just... he gets his ass kicked a lot in this scene, but there's like moments where he like eventually like comes out on top. I've always liked it whenever Indy has like a fight with some big dude. And Pat Roach, who played the mechanic who fights Indy in this scene, appears in... Actually, he appears in the original trilogy. He appears as the Nazi mechanic, as I mentioned before. He appears as the big thuggy in Temple of Doom. And he appears very briefly in The Last Crusade. And the desert truck chase is still one of my favorite chase scenes ever. We first see Indy on a horse, and then he eventually gets on the truck. And some of the stunts in this scene, when you see like guys like falling out of the truck, that's definitely looks like it's some painful looking shit. And there's like one moment in the sequence where Indy gets shot in the arm, and then there's like one Nazi who is on the top of the truck, gets in the truck, punches Indy in the bullet wound, and he ends up on... And eventually Indy ends on the hood of the truck. And what is still an awesome looking stunt, Indy forces himself underneath the truck and then gets dragged behind it on his whip. And then he gets back onto the truck, kicks the shit out of that Nazi, just runs over him, and then he hits Belloc. I'm just like... Good lord, that scene is amazing, and John Williams' score throughout that scene, I love it. And this romance scene with Indy and Marion on this boat, I really, really love it. With him in pain and Marion's like trying to help Indy out, and I like how she's like, damn it, where isn't it hurt? And he just points at his elbow. He's like, here, and then she kisses him on the elbow, and then she continues to kiss him until he eventually points at his lips. That's just so beautiful. And the entire finale of the film is just great. I mean, we see the Nazis preparing the ritual to open up the Ark. Then we see Indy in a Nazi uniform prepared to blow up the Ark, but Belloq tries to persuade Indy not to because he knows that he wants to see the Ark open as well as Belloq does. And I like the line that Belloq says to Indy. Indiana, we are simply passing through history. But this is history. And when Belloq and the Nazis eventually opened up the Ark, at first we see nothing but sand inside of the Ark, but eventually that's when the power of the Ark awakens. And Indy tells Marion that she has to close her eyes because this power is not meant for mortal eyes. We see ghosts coming out of the Ark, and the true power of the Ark awakens because it turns out these ghosts are actually angels of death. And of course, we see like this lightning or something like frying the Nazis, and of course, the Toad's head melts, and then that one guy's head is crushed, and then Belloq's head explodes, and then after that, the holy fires of the Ark just make everybody vanish into thin air. And good lord, these effects after 40 plus years still holds up. Indy meets up with the government agents who tell him that top men have kept the Ark safe. Who? Top men. Indy walks off with Marion, and we see the Ark in one of these crates, and what we now know is Area 51. That is Raiders of the Lost Ark, easily one of the best films of all time. Everything about it is just perfect. The casting, the story, the direction, the cinematography, the amazing score by John Williams, just everything about it is top tier filmmaking. And I never get bored of watching it. Raiders of the Lost Ark is one of the best films ever. And by any chance, have you not watched Raiders of the Lost Ark? Short version is, go watch it as soon as you can. And of course, that means Raiders of the Lost Ark gets an A+. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. So what do y'all think about Raiders of the Lost Ark? Let me know in the comments below. And thank you, Ryan, for collaborating with me on Raiders of the Lost Ark. I definitely can't wait to talk about Temple of Doom and The Last Crusade later this month. And guys, thank you so much as always for watching. Looking forward to doing more videos really soon. And if you want my thoughts on old or new films, of course, you know where to find me.